Well, I went to college for geophysical engineering, so I was an oil exploration guy, and wasn't that great at it. Sort of a bad fit. And then I was in Sumatra, Indonesia, working in the oil fields, and I just started reading a little more and trying to write a little bit at night. And then I had this good fortune. I was dating a girl back in Denver, Colorado, and she broke up with me through a series of letters. There's 7, letters that I got all in one day because of the way the mail works. So at the beginning of reading the letters, we were almost engaged, and by the end, she was engaged with someone else. So that was a rough morning. But then I said, okay, I'm going to go try to win her back. So to get back to the States, you had to stop at this little riverside town, and so I was feeling very tragic. So I went for a skinny dip in the Sumatran River, and at one point I was swimming and kind of crying or whatever, and looked up, and there was a pipeline, and on the pipeline there was about 200 monkeys pooping down into the water, and I thought, oh, I wonder if this is okay, and it wasn't. I got really, really sick, which prompted me to quit the job, and that was kind of when I said, well, all right, this is a sign from God. The monkey poop was a sign from God, and I'll try to make a transition to writing. So that was when I first really self-identified as, this is what I'm going to do, and if it's not this, nothing will ever happen. So I thank the monkeys. Yeah. Mostly just reading. I love the Russian writers, and I find that if I'm kind of starting to doubt the project a little bit, or my ear has gone off or my enthusiasm has waned, if I just read Gogol or Chekhov or Tolstoy, I get kind of charged up. And then I teach at Syracuse, and that's really a great way to stay interested, because we get these students who are so talented, and they kind of have, for 3 years put their life on hold and come to you to try to learn. So you really want to honor that dream of theirs, and being around that much talent is really kind of invigorating. And so there are times when I think, yeah, writing, and then you go in and teach a room full of these kids, and suddenly you just feel like ready to go again. Well, it's a funny conversation, because at Syracuse, if you're taking 6 people out of 600, you're not teaching writing. They already know how to write wonderfully, So what you're really doing is kind of a high-level mentoring, and the way I always describe it is you're trying to take that person up into the zone where she's doing what only she can do, And that's actually really hard. That's not a given. But, they consent to it, we consent to it, and then you're using all kinds of means. I mean, I tend to just do a lot of close line edits, which really everything is contained in that. But also with a program like ours, where they're there for 3 years, you can do a lot of really subtle, almost psychological mentoring, where you come to know the person, you know why they're avoiding certain things, you know why they're gravitating to certain things. And sometimes outside of the classroom at a party or something, you can just drop a little something that'll criticize. So I think you can, I know for a fact that you can do valuable work. The problem is, to say that a creative writing program is no good, you sort of have to say which one. It's like a pub. Is a pub good or not? Well, they're different things. So I think a good program has some kind of built-in mechanism of self-examination. How are we doing? Everyone in the States who teaches creative writing knows the pitfalls. You can list them. They're in every newspaper article. So you just try not to do that. Are we tending to create writers who all sound the same? If so, change. Are we tending to not read enough literature? Well, read more literature. So I don't really, I think this thing about creative writing programs tends to be a nice news article, and over the last 30 years I've seen it cycle in and out, and ultimately a good program is not much different than a group of friends in any city who exchange work and exchange the names of other writers and are intensely honest with each other, sometimes to the point of maybe a brutal honesty. So I don't really have a problem with them. Well, Malcolm Gladwell has that idea about the 10,000 hour rule. You do something for 10,000 hours, and then you'll suddenly, and I think there's truth in that. I don't think I ever learned to write. I think I learned to revise. That for me was a huge thing. So many the young writers that I meet, they, especially undergrads, have the idea that it comes out whole. And if it doesn't, then you're not a writer. And what a liberation to realize there's never been a good first draft of anything, really. Certainly not as good as the fifth draft. So for me, the big breakthrough was when I first started going back to something and saying, this isn't me. It's of me, but it's not me. So therefore, it can be changed. And if there's something I don't like about it, I can fix it. I went to a songwriting seminar right before I started my first book, and I was kind of a little bit lost. I didn't quite know what I was doing. And this songwriter said that whenever he wrote a song, he would record it and play it, and then he would listen to something by Dylan. And we all groaned. Oh, and he said, no. He said, if your own work can still make you sick, it's wonderful. It means your taste is still in effect. So the operating theory is if you do something, it's not good or bad. It's just what you did. Go back to it and see how you react. And if you're honest about that, you get to page 3 and you go, ugh. Then you say, well, why did you make that sound? And if you're not afraid to answer, then fixing it is possible. It's too boring. Oh, that's not a problem. We can make things less boring. So that was when I felt not so much that I learned to write, but that this is something that I'd like to try to work with the rest of my life. It's not impossible, And when you start looking at your own work that way, you are almost automatically looking at yourself. So you do something, you think it's pretty clever on Wednesday. On Thursday, it seems like maybe not so clever. Well, that's an amazing moment because suddenly you're learning something about, of your own opinion of yourself, but you're also learning that you're mutable. What was only 3.2 on the charming scale can be put up to a 6, So I find it really deep and kind of engaging work. Honestly, it's fun. You can dress the answer up and you can come up with all kinds of moral imperatives why. But I think at the end of the day, it's something that intensely enjoyable, probably because it's a form that takes into account everything that you are and allows for it. So let's say that there's something you don't like about yourself, a certain tendency. Well, it's going to get in there anyway. Then you have the opportunity to come back to it and revise it and work with it. So I found it to be a really kind of capacious way of celebrating, really. You just get to truly be yourself, which means also admitting the parts of yourself that you're not crazy about, which to me is sort of a wonderful release, Yeah. And I think there are reasons. I think it can make you, a better person, I suppose, in some way. It can make you more sympathetic to other people's plights and so on. I think it tends to soften the border between people. In other words, often I'll start a story with the intention of sort of pillaring somebody, kind of making a caricature of them. And I'll do that for a few months, and then at some point the story flatlines because the story form doesn't like that. It doesn't like that kind of one-dimensional cruelty. So then you have to come back and start imagining the person more sympathetically. And suddenly, instead of you sort of being a puppeteer, that the character starts coming up on level with you. And that's a really deep thing. And I think that can sometimes start to go out into your real life as well. You start to make a snap judgment on somebody, and then your editing mind comes in and says, well, so for a lot of reasons. But mostly, I think it's just fun, really fun. Honestly, when I was younger, I didn't like it because of the fear of failure. I knew I didn't have anything else going on in my life. I wasn't going to suddenly turn into a lawyer or a banker. So I was terrified to start, and that was painful. But then it seemed to me that once I learned to revise, then it was always fun of a certain sort. Sometimes it's humiliating fun. You don't know why it's taking you so long to finish a piece. But in the ultimate sense, it's fun because you're kind of on the hunt. And at this point, there's nothing about it I don't like. In fact, even when I'm working on something now that's a failure at home, it's kind of, but I've been through that enough times that I'm kind of like, okay, for now it's a failure, but the seeds of success are in it. So that's kind of fun, fun in the sense that it's an adventure, kind of a journey. You know, for example, when I was young, I was from a kind of part of Chicago where people didn't really do writing or art. It was kind of a working neighborhood. And so for many years, when I thought about being a writer, I thought, well, this is a very serious thing. This is very serious. And you should always be reaching above yourself. So I basically eradicated all humor. There's no humor. There were no pop cultural references. There was no real speed in it. It was all very classic, you know, and not in a good way. And then when I first made a breakthrough was when I realized that without those things, I didn't really have anything to say. So then suddenly to drop that scrim and say, okay, humor, come in, working class understanding, come in, even my own sort of limited abilities with language, those have to come in. And then that is self-discovery. It's self-admission in a certain way. You say, even though this thing and this thing, I scrupulously keep them out of my life day to day, they have to come in, you know, in order for a story to work, it's all got to come in. So. No, because my first book I actually wrote at work, illegally. So that was, before that I'd been a little bit precious, you know, you have to, certain time of day, have to feel a certain way. And then had this office job, and we had both of our daughters, their babies, and it started to occur to me that, you know, the world would prefer that I didn't write, and those ideal conditions were not going to appear ever. So I just thought, well, it's either, you know, right here at my desk, in the 15 minutes I can steal, or don't do it. So that actually turned out to be great discipline, because instead of saying, well, I need to go do some research, or I need to be in the right frame of mind, you just cut to the chase, and your thing was, this 15 minutes might be all I get today. It conveyed a kind of urgency to what you were doing. You know, if you didn't have something really good to type, you just skipped it. So no, I can pretty much, you know, write on an airplane or write on a bus. Or, I mean, I try to be now a little more, carve out about 4 or 5 hours in the morning is ideal, but I'm still pretty flexible, I think. Well, I think partly when we think about ourselves, who we really are, we're lucky because we have a very deep look into ourselves. You know, we can be manifesting outwardly a certain way, and there's all kinds of internal things going on, and we understand ourselves as the sum total of that. Well, when I was first writing, I was thinking, well, how do I want to sound? What do I want people to think of me? So, and putting that on the page. And then when I would read it, it just felt like all those internal things were missing. All the self-doubt, all the actual stuff of life was missing. So, you know, there's a wonderful essay by Donald Barthelmess, this American writer, called On Not Knowing. And he says, the writer is that person who, embarking on her task, has no idea how to begin. And that is, for me, is kind of a mantra that, you know, in this kind of setting, when we talk about writing, it always sounds like we know what we're doing, you know, that the writer has an intention and then executes. But my experience has been that it's not that at all. It's more coming to the task with a sense of openness and real befuddlement even, and then seeing what you can get going. And that means you don't decide in advance about plot, you don't decide in advance about theme or any of that, you don't decide in advance about voice, but whatever you can get to have energy, that's your story. Flannery O'Connor said a writer can choose what he writes, but he can't choose what he makes live. So I think one of the great sort of untold stories about the artistic process is that often you really don't know. You might have a vague intention, but if you stick to the vague intention, you're almost guaranteed to make something of low energy, because it's sort of de facto condescending for me to say, I have something to tell you. Whether you're interested or not, I have this thing I want to force on you. That actually is the opposite of a true artistic conversation, which is much more intimate. You know, if a writer, I would say, if a writer knows too well what he wants to do, the analogy would be somebody going on a date with index cards, you know, and you say, oh, it's 7 o'clock, compliment her outfit. 7:30, ask about her mother. You might get all your points taken care of, but the person won't be very interested. So I think it's that continual re-engagement in this process of not knowing that keeps it really interesting for me.